internal dynamics and undergird the logic of the capitalist system. That's a reformist reform. I think non-reformist reforms, to use Andre Gortz's distinction, a non-reformist reform has to absolutely undercut the logic of the system, but particularly also to empower those opponents of the system. Reformist reforms will take away your momentum and co-opt you and divide and conquer you and leave you without a movement. Non-reformist reforms, or transitional reforms, our Trotskyist friends would say, maybe, would then open the door to much more revolutionary options and ideas and possibilities. And the genuine reforms that we're looking at would include leaving the oil in the soil, a little idea that's becoming a lot more popular. So I thought we could talk about that in Canada with the biggest industrial project in world history coming up in Alberta. And indeed, it's the conservation of natural resources, the fundamental problem. Gore is acknowledging Theodore Roosevelt's quote in October 1907. Unless we solve that problem, it will avail us little to solve all others. So in that spirit, let's think about some of the aspects of climate justice that involve conservation or just resource, non-renewable resource depletion and addressing that properly. First, to introduce you, if you aren't aware, a concept of ecological debt that the North, the Canadians, owe the Third World, and again, South Africa is in the global North for sure. It's a debt accumulated by northern industrial countries towards Third World countries on account of resource plundering, environmental damages, the preoccupation of environmental space to deposit waste, such as greenhouse gases from industrial countries. Jubilee South, a very, very strong network, very powerful branches in Argentina and Nicaragua and the Philippines, bringing this to everyone's attention. A very strong analyst who, in fact, has taught here in Toronto at York Politics and Faculty of Environmental Studies, Jean Martinez-Allier, associated with the Capitalism and Intersocialism, has gone through a whole set of these and is calculating them in very sophisticated ways, such as the export of resources, the future lack of availability of destroyed non-renewable resources, the damages produced by exports like smelters, sulfur dioxide, mine tailings, water pollution, biopiracy, the stolen genetic resources of the Third World, the import of solid or liquid toxic waste, and then crucially here the disproportionate use of environmental space, the unpaid costs of the free disposal of gas residues, CO2 and CFCs and methane, assuming equal rights to sinks and reservoirs. So it sounds a bit techy. That's important. It's $75 billion a year is that sort of sink function that the rainforests of the Amazon and Central Africa and Southeast Asia are playing, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So I think it's becoming a much more serious way, and I want to even go a bit deeper, and I'm going to go to the bastion of sort of bourgeois orthodox economics to make this point in just a minute, the World Bank itself. But just to, again, introduce another couple of problems here. You've heard of the resource curse, excessive fossil fuel resources in a context of growing international interest, and that's particularly now the U.S. Africa Command without a real base in Africa. Their base is Stuttgart. They're going to be using their ships to patrol up and down the Gulf of Guinea, as you see there, the site of Africa's big oil reserves, as well as on the east coast, the Horn of Africa. They're looking for oil now as far down the east coast as Kenya. And so the U.S. Africa Command is of great concern. The patrimonial politics from the Chinese regime, which include sort of no strings attached loans to the dictatorial regimes of Angola and Sudan and Zimbabwe, and investments in Nigeria. And so China becomes, I think, an inter-imperial competitor here. The European Union has been pushing really hard, a little bit of resistance recently, but brutal. Peter Mandelson, just in South Africa this last week, not very successful, but he's their European Union's trade commissioner, and their economic partnership agreements are, again, trying to liberalize and push the export model that the World Bank and IMF has. The South African government's acquired about $5 billion worth of offensive weaponry in the last 5 years. That's kind of disturbing for those of us that consider South Africa a sub-imperial power, and persistent coups. So it's a wild place. And I'm going to make an argument at the end, which is that because it's been so destroyed by these extractive industries. A particularly powerful responsibility that we have, I think, to support the demands of people who are victims of those industries and to figure out where we can get cleaner energy available to everyone across Africa. I'll give you a little hint of where that's going. Well, as I say, we've got to deal with these techie issues a little bit. I hate to keep badgering on about technical stuff, but you know, it's a university kind of occupational hazard. The gross domestic product has to be corrected for all sorts of things, like pollution isn't included, or unpaid work of women in communities in their homes. And particularly non-renewable resource extraction, in which minerals or oil that was in the ground and is taken out gets put by economists as a credit to your GDP the 1 year that incomes come in. But they don't put a debit for the natural wealth that's been extracted and will never be there again. So the genuine progress indicator of this San Francisco NGO redefining progress is one way. But I think this has even become so obvious that the World Bank's now itself had to look into this. And here's what they've been doing. They've been developing 4 corrections to GDP, in this case Bolivia. But they first depreciate fixed capital, so wear and tear. Then they say, okay, if you're investing in human capital through education, human capital, then you get an increase. But then deplete the natural resources. And for Africa, this is our crucial step. And then pollution damages. So you get 4 steps along the way to take you from gross national income to your genuine savings, the real change in wealth. And when we do that for Africa, we don't have data for some of the worst countries, Angola and DRC, for example. But let's just take Gabon, which you can't really see, can you? But it's $3,370 per person income in the year 2000. And then you do these adjustments to the gross domestic product, and you find actually that the average Gabonese has actually lost $2,241 in the year 2000. They haven't gained there's a net loss in there of over $5,600 because of the extraction of resources, primarily the oil from Gabon. And even South Africa, which is a very industrialized, the sort of biggest industrial economy in Africa, even South Africa from $2,837 per person GDP, make the corrections, and it's minus $2. So these are really important ways of us now becoming aware and codified by, bourgeois think tank, the World Bank, to say, actually, it does make sense to extract minerals and petroleum, especially if it's multinational corporations taking it out. There's no reinvestment, and venal elites are kept in power. You know the story. But now we have some of the numbers to show it. But the real story is coming from the activists, and they range from Alaskan campaigners who kept the oil from being taken out of the tundra, and Californians who stopped drilling on the coast. Oil Watch is a great network, and in 2006 they declared this slogan. Particularly some of the most serious activists who now host Oil Watch, by the way, in an NGO called Environmental Rights Action in Port Harcourt, Nigeria. The women of the Niger Delta who take their clothes off and sit down and just block the Chevron oil or whatever oil company from operating. There's a group or a set of groups, it's hard to figure out what's really going on, the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta, who kidnap foreign oil workers. I think they have always kept them safe and given them a Stockholm syndrome so that they're then convinced of the enormous damages. That's what I understand anyway. But this is all terribly important for civil society activism. It became actually a powerful tool once you control a state. Last August, when Rafael Correa, the president of Ecuador, declared that the Yasuni National Park, which has